What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So this is the Samsung Galaxy A21s, and it's technically the first S upgrade to an A series phone for 2020. Even though it came out before the regular A21, I still don't really understand what happened with the launch there. It was super weird, but it's here. I've had it for a few weeks now, and I have a lot of thoughts about this phone. First off, I want to offer some advice up front for those of you who may be considering some other devices. If you're thinking about getting the A11, I'd say just spend a little bit of extra money if you can and get this phone instead. It's well worth it. If you're considering the regular A21, I'd say definitely just skip that one too and jump straight to the A21s if you can. It's obviously the better device in a lot of ways. But if you're comfortable stretching your budget a little further than that and can jump to the A31, I'd say get that phone instead of this one. While last year's A20 line I thought was a great value, this year the A21s misses the mark on a couple of things that I think are important, which I'll touch on in this video. Overall though, this is a really solid phone, especially for the price, and I think worldwide this is probably going to be one of the most popular phones in its price range. So enough talking, let's just go ahead and jump right into it, and we'll go over everything this phone has to offer. Let's actually start with the price first so we know what we're working with here. Now, for the most part, this phone should be available for under $250 no matter where in the world you live. In fact, here in the US, on places like Amazon, you can already pick up an unlocked A21s for just a little over $200. It came down in price a bit already just a month or so after launch, and you might actually be able to get this newer, nicer, more feature-rich A21s for less than the cost of a regular A21 from a US carrier. So if you haven't looked into buying an unlocked phone outright, it might be worth considering. And if you guys are interested in doing some comparison shopping of your own, or maybe you want to pick up this phone for yourself, I will have some links down below in the video description to where you can get this phone at its cheapest current prices. So be sure to check down there so you don't miss out on any good deals. Right off the bat, the first thing I think people will notice about this A21s is its screen size. It's a big phone, and for the price, that's a big plus for a lot of people. However, there's one glaring issue with the A21s's display that has to be considered. And if you saw my regular A21 review, you already know what that is because both of these phones have the same setup. It's a 720p LCD display. The A21s got the 1600 by 720 resolution PLS TFT panel with a pixel density of around 270 pixels per inch. If you know anything about last year's A20, you know that that phone was so popular and such a good value because it came with the much better AMOLED screen. Samsung, for whatever reason, just decided to drop the AMOLED display here on this year's A21s and A21 phones, which I think is a big mistake. It kills a little bit of the value, and it's kind of slimy, taking away a great feature they had already offered on the previous year's phone. Sure, we get the updated design with a corner hole punch Infinity O selfie camera and a little slimmer bezels and bottom chin. There's no doubt the phone looks a little more modern and refreshed, but honestly, if it's between a 720p AMOLED screen with a teardrop notch and a 720p LCD screen with a camera cutout, I'll take the AMOLED display every time. It's brighter, it's more colorful, it looks more pleasing, and it's just a better overall display. Now, fortunately, there's nothing wrong with what the A21s offers. This big 6.5-inch screen is great for watching movies and browsing social media. Whatever it is you're doing, it's going to be a solid viewing experience on this phone. It's plenty bright, there's enough color. It's not the sharpest resolution since we are still dealing with 720p at this size, but from like a normal distance, it's fine to look at. The bottom line though is that it's just not AMOLED, and it's a shame Samsung took that away. That's also why at the start of this video, I mentioned maybe just getting the A31 instead over this phone if you can afford it. The A31 has the 1080p resolution AMOLED display, way nicer in every respect. So that's one of the main reasons why I might make the jump up and pay a little extra for that device. This A21s though, it's fine as it is, just so long as you don't make too many comparisons like I just did. The 6.5-inch form factor though with this phone, like I said, is pretty awesome for the price. The only downside really is that in the hand, it may not be the right fit for everyone. It's comfortable enough for someone like me, but there's no understating just how large of a device this is. In fact, just by sheer body size, including not just the screen, but the bezels and housing and everything else, this is one of the biggest Samsung phones out right now. Like I said, for the price, you've got quite the media device you can take with you on the go. Watching content on this thing is awesome, but just take into consideration all those inches you'll be handling. Physically, I actually think the A21s is a really good looking phone. Obviously, I got mine in this blue color, and just like the rest of the higher end A series phones this year, you've got that sort of holographic rainbow finish that adds just a little bit more to the premium look of this phone. It is still plastic though, so keep that in mind, but like I've said a million times now with these A series phones, they just don't feel cheap. Samsung does a nice job with the materials and the build, and not only do they look super nice, but they feel good too, even with the cheaper material. And looking around this A21s, everything that should be here is here, which is great. You've got your expandable storage and SIM card tray on the one side, regular old power and volume controls on the other. There's no Bixby button or assistant button anywhere. And down below, there's the headphone jack, USB-C charging port, and single speaker. Like the rest of the A series phones, this speaker I'd say is good enough. It's fine for an out loud listening experience, but other phones, especially those with stereo sound, are better. And yes, there are budget and mid-range phones that do offer dual stereo speakers, so I think it's time Samsung steps it up a little bit. Around back, the A21s has the regular old rear-mounted fingerprint reader. This setup is just perfect for this phone. I wouldn't change a thing, and if you want to pair it with Face Unlock, you can. That's what I always do in order to just get into the phone as quickly as possible. The only thing I noticed is that every once in a while there's a bit of a holdup with Face Unlock. I'm not entirely sure what the deal is, but it's not as consistent as some other A series devices, which is a little weird. Not a big deal, just something I did want to mention. Now inside, the A21s has a really interesting array of specs that I think is important that we focus on. Let me first just give you the details, and I'll explain the importance of it all in just a second. You get Samsung's own brand new Exynos 850 processor, the choice of 3, 4, or 6 gigabytes of RAM, and either 32 or 64 gigabytes of built-in storage, with, like I said, the option to throw in an SD card if you want to. Now, first things first, just having the option to bump up the specs at all with this phone is one of the advantages it does have over the regular A21. The regular A21 has just one configuration option with 32 gigs of storage and 3 gigabytes of RAM, and I don't really think that's enough. With the A21s, you start out at the same level, but if you want more, you can at least get more, and going with 6 gigabytes of RAM might be a worthy investment. The phone I have here though is the sort of mid-level one, 4 gigabytes of RAM and 64 gigabytes of storage, and I actually do think that's a nice balance, plenty to work with for whatever you need. The big thing I know people want to know about this though is that processor. This year, Samsung introduced the Exynos 850 as their new budget chipset, and this is the first phone that gets it. I have to say, I think that gamble paid off because I have no complaints. Here are the Geekbench and Antutu scores for those of you who want to know. But while previous Exynos chipsets had sort of a bad reputation of just not performing all that well, especially under pressure, I've truly pushed this 850 series chipset quite hard, and I haven't seen it falter all that much. No, it's not going to be the fastest processor. It's still a budget component after all, but it can do basically whatever it is you want it to do. Apps stay refreshed in the background for the most part. Games launch well enough, a little slow to get going on the main screen sometimes, but once you're in, there's really no issues. And if you want a dedicated performance and gaming test with this phone, I do already have that as a separate video on my channel, so check that out if you're interested. But let me just finish up by saying this. If you had any issues with Samsung's Exynos chipset in the past, that's fine, you're definitely not alone. They haven't done a good job, even with their flagship devices. But this Exynos 850, I think, is a step in the right direction, and it was probably the right move, all things considered. This is obviously a better performing phone than the regular A21 in a lot of ways. I think you have enough spec options to where you can upgrade it if you're interested in doing so. And once again, this is just one more thing where paying a little extra for this phone over the standard A21 is where you get the value. It's worth spending a little more because you do truly get more. And interestingly enough, you also get a larger battery with this A21s as well. This phone packs a really good sized 5000 milliamp battery inside, and that's been plenty to get me through more than a day's use. The new Exynos chipset hasn't been a battery hog, which is good. Everything is managed pretty well, and the lower resolution screen, even though it is so big, keeps power consumption relatively low. You get 1000 more milliamp capacity over the A21, which can equate to quite a few extra hours of use. And all in all, not only does this phone have excellent battery life in general, it's just one more reason still why it's worth spending a little more for this phone. So last but not least, let's talk cameras. And to be totally honest, there's not a whole lot to say here because the hardware and specs and everything are sort of what we've seen a few times before on recent A-series phones, but that's a good thing. Around back, there's a really solid 48 megapixel main lens, 8 megapixel ultra wide, 2 megapixel macro, and 2 megapixel depth sensor. On the software side of things, there's really no surprises here. You unfortunately don't get anything more, and it doesn't compete with the higher end A-series phones, but there's still enough to work with. The wide angle is particularly useful. I tend to use that a lot. Live focus shots are good. There's 1080p video at only 30 frames per second, but I don't really think you can ask for more than that. There's HDR, a couple other random shooting modes and settings, and of course the 48 megapixel shooting mode, which if you have this phone or any of the other high megapixel A-series phones, make sure you enable that and actually use it. You did pay for it after all. You may as well take advantage and capture as much detail as possible in your shots. Now, while I don't think the macro lens is useful, I never really have, everything else is good, and I'm happy to say this phone does take some great pictures. I tend to always shoot with that full 48 megapixels, and that really brings out a lot of the details. Colors look pretty good, maybe a little pale, but I think people would prefer that over something that's more saturated. No night mode here, so low light shooting isn't the best, and unfortunately no real video stabilization either, which is super obvious. I think, to be honest, those are the two last things that should be introduced to these budget and mid-range phones just to sort of finish off a camera setup, but everything else for the most part here is good. The 13 megapixel selfie camera is also pretty good too, which is nice to see. All in all, it's a good setup for this phone and an improvement over some of the devices last year. It's a step in the right direction, and there's plenty to work with. So here are my final thoughts. The A21s honestly is a good phone. I think it's almost perfect for the price, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm not still sour about the lack of an AMOLED screen. I am, and shame on Samsung for taking that away. Beyond that, this is a well-rounded device, and it packs just about everything for the price. Most importantly, I do think the new Exynos chipset is good, and performance-wise, I was pleasantly surprised. The thing about these A-series phones, though, is that there's just so many this year, and a lot of them are so close in price. If you can spend maybe $50 more and get the A31, you should. If you're looking at the A11 or A21, just get this A21s instead. It's worth the extra money. And if the A21s is all you're looking at, well, you'll still end up with a good phone anyway. But what do you guys think? Is this A21s something that you like? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts, of course. But hopefully you guys did enjoy this video. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys later.